Welcome to Renaissance Charge videos. And in this video, we're going to show some very interesting things. It's one of my most important videos, I think, that I'll ever do, because it has to deal with the first free energy patent, or Overunity patent. And so what I want to go over today is the first patent by Cook, and then other patents that followed the same method of extracting energy from the local environment, and followed by the understanding of the induction coil, which we have here on the screen, as well as the Benitez model, which is one of the next patents to follow Cook's idea. And then we'll get into the safety of running these systems in that. So let's go over, starting with a quote here by Mueller. Well, first of all, let me just say, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how these free energy systems work. Now, some people don't like that name, that term free energy, and that's fine. I don't care about words so much here. Overunity, people define that differently as well. We're talking about an exotic system that doesn't run like regular conventional circuitry, that you take a battery, for example, and you charge up another battery in excess, and the whole thing maintains itself, and you have usable work. This is what people will call free energy. They will call this Overunity. If the system never wears out, then they could call it perpetual motion. All similar ideas. There's a lot of fraud, deception, mistakes in this whole research. And so what we want to look at is some credible people in history. We want to look at a working model here. This is the Benitez system. This is an induction coil. And we have two 12-volt batteries in series going into two 12-volt batteries in parallel, and we are going to continually rotate these around according to the Benitez patent. So we'll get into that later. I just showed it briefly running here. You can see the lights as the usable load, charging of the batteries from the one battery bank, the discharging of this battery bank, so forth. We'll look at that more specifically later on. So let's start off with a quote by one of these inventors over the last 150 years, Bill Mueller, defining what we're talking about here. By cleverly counterbalancing their equal and opposite reactions to each other in space and in time, partly by mechanics, partly by timing, partly by circuitry, and partly by material science, mechanical, electrical work can be extracted from them sufficient to show so-called overunity production of net energy. That means efficiency greater than 100%, an actual amplification of the available energy as opposed to a net composite consumption of the energy. So people can argue about the different words and where the energy is coming from. I know this is debatable. We can't actually observe a lot of things, and we have to speculate. We have to say, where is this coming from? Whether the first and second laws of thermodynamics are actually violated, whether they are real laws or not, it doesn't really matter per se. It does in one sense, but it doesn't in the practical sense for people like you and me. Now, if we are actually creating a dangerous thing, we're depleting some kind of energy that's healthy, then it matters. I don't really think that anybody's really worried about that aspect of things. So if we are getting an excess of energy from what we normally find, then we have to explain it. We want to try and explain it somehow. a lot of people explain that there's a lot more available energy in the local area, and we are tapping into that more, and our circuits so far have been very limited. I think many people will agree with that. Whether there is a creation of extra energy is, again, a debated thing. It's not my objective to do that. It's to show that under regular means here, regular type of systems, if we can just change some things up a little bit and create excess energy somehow, that's what we're talking about over unity, free energy. I guess the difference would be free energy would be excess energy, not necessarily equal to the input, but for example, if I ran off a battery, a motor, and then I charged up another battery part way, that would be free energy. Over unity would be if I continued to charge that and replace completely the energy that was drained in the source, or if I looped it around, then that would be considered over unity, over one. So that's Bill Mueller. This is one of the early induction coils. Let's get right into the point here as we start off. Let's look at Cook. In 1871, a famous man by the name Daniel McFarland Cook, he actually produced a patent here, October 10th, 1871, patent number 119825, in which he claimed a form of what people would call perpetual motion. So right here it says in Cook's patent, by this means a constant current is kept up in the several helices. So what we have here is Cook claiming to be able to not need a battery to run these coils. They're induction coils in a perpetual loop. And we'll get into the diagram of these here as I'll show in a loop fashion here. Now what is really important to understand here is, I think first of all, there's very few people actually looking into Cook's system. People have heard of him. They generally don't try and even replicate what he did, because they look at the system and they say, well, how can it work? Well, the first thing that they miss, this is the point of this whole video here, the main first point. There's a lot of sub-points, but this is the main point. What is the title of Cook's patent? Now, this is the key to understanding what he did, which is an improvement upon what? The induction coil. Induction coils. What is an induction coil? Induction coil is not merely what you see in these pictures here. It also includes an interrupter. This is very important. There's a spark gap. There's an interrupter. There's a like a distributor cap in your car. There is a on and off make and break contact. These pictures do not show everything in the patent. In the patent, he talks about a rheostat in the coils in the system, and so this would be the rheostat would be in the line here and here somewhere. So this is not in his pictures, either is the interrupter part. Now, how can I prove what I'm talking about? First of all, his patent makes no sense without an interrupter. There's no way physically possible to maintain a standing wave inside of this configuration of 4 coils. He even talks about single coils as opposed to a primary and a secondary. So how on earth could you run 2 single wires together, 2 single coils, and perpetuate a loop? You couldn't. there is a loss, obviously, in such a mechanism. However, if we look at what an induction coil is, which we have right here, one example of an induction coil. Let's consider an induction coil, for example, and see that it consists of a primary and secondary as well as this interrupter. There's a capacitor across the contacts. So right here you have a bendable hammer, so to speak, and as you close the loop across the primary here, so if you got a battery, now you've closed the loop, this is a contact point, it opens up right here. You can see what I'm pointing to. So what happens is, as this it gets switched on, this induces a current flow across this primary coil, in which energizes the soft iron, and then it pulls this closed, pulls this little contact here. What happens then is this opens up, and then this de-energizes and comes back and closes again, and it repeats this many times a second, depending upon the flexibility of this right here. So we can look at another picture of an induction coil right here. For example, and there's a set screw adjustable set terminal that can change this gap, make it go faster and smaller. So I've got that right here. And so what happens is, a lot of things, it's quite a mystery actually, and I'll quote later on here some of the books of the time. For the period of about 100 years, they still considered both the capacitor's role, which is not merely a spark gap protector, but it has an additive feature to it, but also the relationship between the primary and secondary coils is somewhat of a mystery even today, exactly what happens and how there is amplification there. Now, some people will believe there isn't any amplification. This system right here, anybody can do, fairly easy, and it will show anybody that there is an amplification, and this is an Overunity device. This is just like my motors. In fact, we run our motors in the same way, and we have shown that in this system right here. The loving path circuit, where we have the two battery banks here and then a charging third battery, and the motor is run between the two battery banks and produces two sets of charging that we can rotate around, and we can continue to have a mechanical load. In this case, we don't have a mechanical load, we have some light bulbs running, and we're going to look at several of the Benitez systems here, but let's go back to Cook now. In Cook's patent, we want to look at a few things of significance. Well, first of all, I want to say, secondly, I want to say that many other patents have followed this Cook Benitez system. Generally, Tesla gets all the credit for some strange reason. Tesla improved upon some of these processes in his own way, but he did not invent the induction coil. nor did he invent the bifilar coil. Now, he did invent the pancake coil, which is what we're going to look at in a little while, and that is a bifilar coil. But the properties, the benefits from the bifilar coil were not first discovered by Tesla. So I want to dispel that mistake. So there's several mistakes here that I see thousands of people making in these in this research, and I want to get back to the beginning here. So I think we need to really carefully look at Cook. Now, Cook wasn't just some strange individual that popped out of nowhere and disappeared. Cook was famous already as in 1850, so that's 21 years earlier. He already had several patents in between that time, and starting in 1850, I believe, he developed a process for producing maple syrup, which was used all over the United States and world for years. And so he wasn't just a no-name strange individual that was just filing a patent here. Now, the other thing is, patents really had to be working and demonstratable during that time. There had to be witnesses, and there was two witnesses here in this patent. Now, what's also interesting, just to talk about Cook a little bit here, there was an article published several years ago about Cook, and that was in, I'll show you here, so there's an article in, well, that's not it. There is, let's see, oh yeah, this is the recent article by Timothy Bryan McKee. He's a columnist. Mansfield DM Cook and his enduring energy. And he talks about how people understood him, what his accomplishments were. I'll provide the link here on the page so that you can read this yourself. I've transcribed this and I'll put it on my website. And he then refers to Cook as very interesting individual. Some people branded him Crazy Cook, but he was certainly somebody to be taken seriously because of his accomplishments. Now, he refers to articles in 1886 that he found, which I have found 8 different references here to Cook in the newspapers. So starting with Semi-Weekly South Kentucky, 1886 November 6, and you can look up these newspaper articles and do searches on them, and that is how I found all these 8 articles here, by typing in the title, which was, let's look at it more clearly here. Quite sure of it. Let's go deeper. Let's go explode this up a little bit bigger. So you can see the date, volume number 8. And here we have the article, quite sure of it. One who thinks he has cornered perpetual motion. An Ohio man invents an electrical machine which he claims will run until it wears itself out. Mystery of force. So I transcribed this recently here. And different newspaper articles change maybe the title. Is it perpetual motion? The invention of an Ohio man who expects to revolutionize the world. An electrical machine which he claims will run until it wears itself out. Mystery force. So this was a little extra on the title there. Same article repeated about 7 or 8 times in that end of 1886. So I won't go over this because it'll take too long, but it is definitely a very interesting read in which this particular man ends up looking at his machine, or two of his machines running, and already in 1886. So the patent was already 1871, and what is stated in 1886 is probably some improvement upon the patent, but he describes in here the man's, Mr. Cook's, he was a perfectionist. He was very careful before he revealed this to the world. He made sure it worked actually for years, and I think he improved upon it, so it produced quite a bit of output from what the patent shows. So let's not bother with reading any of this right now, but let's get into the patent a little bit more. And you can see his whole family was involved in it in that article as well. So again, let's look at the patent a bit here. The diagrams show iron. Now you could either use laminations or a solid iron bar. He talks about in the patent that if you use solid iron, it can get hot. You can create free heat. He also talked about running a motor off of each end, like we do in our systems, something similar to this. We do use single and bifilar coils, and so essentially what he's doing here is, like I said, circulating the energy, and the only way, like I talked about, doing this, where we have this, is if we put an interrupter on, say right here. So what will happen then is, let's go back to the picture of induction coil. So if we make this the primary, not the secondary, and we've isolated these wires, and we have a capacitor, so it really holds it in a system where it's not going to, like if we disconnected this here, what would happen would be, he says in his patent that it would stop. So there has to be a constant continuation, which he talks about in a rheostat, but it's also implied in his title of an improvement of induction coils. An induction coil was not merely a transformer. You have to really grasp that. If you look into all the literature of the time, and all the patents that use the word induction coil, they always had an interrupter. Now the induction coil changed over the years, and we're going to look at that in a minute, but it didn't change in this form of interrupter here. And so if a patent would use the term transformer, then we can understand where we have two wires, for example. But to use the word induction coil has to mean the interrupter during that time. Many patents stated that. They showed a picture where they did not show the interrupter portion of it. We're going to look at Benitez system here, which he does that in these drawings right here. Let's see, we're going to look at various inventors. That's why I have these on the screen here. So the Benitez system, you can see the interrupter here in the induction coil here and here, but in the actual images, you can see right here, there is supposed to be an interrupter right here. It's assumed. It's not put in there because it essentially is he's not concerned with showing that. Now, for us, 100 years later, it becomes confusing because if we don't know the language, we don't know what an induction coil is, that it has an interrupter, then we make the mistake. Unfortunately, Patrick Kelly made that mistake in his free energy book, and several others. I believe everybody else has made this mistake with Cook's system, but in Benitez, his wording, he talks about induction coil having an interrupter right here in these several patents of his. And so in some of the diagrams he includes the picture, and some of them he doesn't. So for example, here's another patent which the interrupter is right here on the primary induction coil. And in fact, in this one, he actually talks about plural induction coils. Now these are clearly transformers here and here, and there's a spark gap right here. But he talks about induction coils, induction coil or induction coils in his patent. So it must be understood that it's factually the case. Now it's to me absolutely the case in Cook's, because you couldn't have had this otherwise. Now many people would disbelieve that this could, with two of these coils or a transformer and an induction coil, that you could close the loop on it and keep it running and run a load off of it. This has been done in various ways with a lot of people, or several people, over the last 100 years, but starting with Cook. He claims that, he stakes his reputation on the line. There was witnesses, it was published in newspapers, and of course we can demonstrate that. I don't have that ability to demonstrate that here right now, but I will demonstrate this. It's easier for you to replicate. Now, the thing about it is, in an induction coil, we have a gain. We have an amplification. We don't just have a voltage increase, but we have a relationship that is somewhat mysterious between these two windings and the capacitor. So if there is a gain here, like I am showing here, you can verify this yourself. I'm not going to try and prove in this video that this is a gain. You can see battery voltages, whatever. You have to do this over time, weeks, which is what I did with this model. This particular one is kind of sporadic. It's the contacts aren't very good, you know, so it wasn't the best model to demonstrate, but I was able to demonstrate to myself this. If there's a gain here, then we can close a loop. What is essential in a free energy system is an open loop of some sort. We cannot close a loop completely because we have the normal losses that you incur with a closed loop system. So this is why what we do in our systems is we open the loop up as opposed to a closed loop. So let's look at this diagram, for example. If we look at so the thing about this is that we have a closed loop across a load such as a motor. Now I've shown this in my previous videos where you have a regular brushless motor, for example, with its flyback diodes, and there's two closed loops here where you are running the load directly across the battery, and here we're running the flyback diode directly across the coil. And so therefore we've got two closed loops. We don't have any possibility of a gain here. Now the magnets create an interesting advantage in this system. It is kind of considered somewhat of an open loop in using the magnetism, but that is still a under unity system. Here we have opening the loop across. This is what we do. We convert this brushless fan so that it charges a battery. So this is by beginning loving giving paths as opposed to the selfish, unthankful circuit, which I call, I'll throw the word Benitez into this mix here now because it means blessed, the word Benitez. So a loving, giving path as we share the grace given to us from heaven, we are more blessed in giving than receiving. And so here we can actually use this available energy and multiply it. We can get more out from it. So going from there, we can also have two batteries and run a load between two batteries, which is what we're doing here. We're running this motor between the two battery banks as well as the lights, and we're charging this battery all the same and we're running the load. We have some losses because we're still closed looped here. And so here we go and combine these two processes into what I showed, the third process, which would be running the motor, or in this case the induction coil, between the two batteries positives. So we've got 24 volts here and two 12 volts here, and so 4 batteries that we can change around. Not quickly, we don't want to do the Tesla circuit. The Tesla switch circuit is a destructive circuit for batteries. Do not use it, you'll destroy your batteries. Don't be fooled by it, guys. Many of you have been fooled by that circuit, and you shouldn't waste your time on it because it will destroy your batteries in short order. Anyway, here we have not only the basic process here where we're charging a battery, but we're actually charging 2 battery banks here. And because we're creating this pulse in a unique way here, we can get some of this energy that is lost here also to increase the switching time between these two batteries. This battery 3 is obviously totally separated from these two, in which you can run a load like an inverter off of. Well, I've already shown those details and explained them. We can talk about an added process yet, the 0 point process, in which all the batteries, 4 banks of batteries here now, can maintain their charge and not just discharge at all. And so we can recover all the losses in this closed loop here with the 0 point process. Now, the thing about it is, Don Smith said this in one of his videos 10 years ago or so, because we can charge this battery because it's operating at a different there's another frequency, there's 2 frequencies. The frequency of the motor running, or the induction coil in this case, is one frequency, and the 0 point process, the additive process here, is another frequency, usually a higher frequency, and that will override in this system. While it can actually speed up the motor, which is what we showed in a previous video, it actually doesn't really see it, it almost overrides it, and this can charge up under that circumstance. So let's go back to Cook's patent now and consider, it's a very basic system here, and there's a couple of notes I want to make reference to in his patent here, wherever I can find his notes. I guess I closed it out. Let me go back to the notes file here. That's already open. Okay, here it is. So, improvement upon induction coils, and I retyped this out, and I'll put this on the website. So be it known that I, Daniel McFarland Cook of Mansfield in the county of Richland in the state of Ohio, and we were just down there showing this a week ago in Ohio. I have invented an electromagnetic battery, okay, a battery, of which the following is a specification. My invention relates to the combination of two or more simple or compound helices and iron cores or magnets. So you could think of a ferrite in that case too, in such a manner as to produce a constant electric current without the aid of a galvanic battery. Without the aid. So, key point. Figure 1 represents the different parts of the compound helix and iron core. Figure 2 represents a view of my invention, a perspective view of my invention. In carrying out my invention, I do not confine myself to a particular mode of constructing a helix or helices, or to any particular size of wire, observing only that the quantity of wire in the several helices is sufficient to produce the results. Okay, using less or more wire in the helices to suit the purpose for which they are designed. Also using such material for insulating the helices as will secure proper action. Okay, so notice that he's not confining himself like many patents. They're open, they're broad, and again, remember that these are not merely by themselves. They are with an interrupter. They have to be, because the whole thing is an induction coil. And it's an improvement upon induction coils, like plural there. It's not an improvement upon transformers. It's taking the process and saying, hey, we know we already have multiplication. We have a gain in this induction coil. And now let's improve upon this so that we can actually use it for a battery. In other words, a source becomes its own source without needing batteries. Now he also, I believe some of his patents were on making batteries as well. I'm not going to get into that. So he obviously, in the article that I mentioned, talks about him being expert in electronics of the day, in which he spent many years in the deepest study. So I prefer, however, in common to use the same size wire in the construction of either simple or compound helices to obtain a sufficient tension or quality of current. Use a long iron core. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights here. 2 or 3 or even 6 feet in length is iron cores. 6 feet, that's pretty big. And 2, 3 or more inches in diameter. We're talking about a big core here. Also long copper wire of good conductivity. Being insulated. Now, some have wondered whether this insulation makes a difference in his system, but they're missing the point. This is the kind of insulation that was used at the time, which is in this coil here. The shellac would be the same thing as our insulation wire. We have improvement upon our insulation wire. So it is interesting to go back and find these devices and use them and to see if there is a difference. Sometimes there are fundamental differences between what we do today and what they did back then. So if we miss those key points. So let's look at further here the insulation, silk, shellac, paraffin only, the latter being objectionable as it's able to be melted. So let's not get hung up on these particulars, because I will show this as running, and you gotta just focus in on what is important, what's not. So my object is twofold. One, to show this is the first source of all this that needs to be acknowledged because there's a big misunderstanding about a historical element. I deal with a lot of history. I'm a history student. I could call myself a scholar, but I'm more self-taught, so I will just stick with being a history student. But I have studied a lot of history from a lot of different angles, not just science, but history of religions and so forth, and other types of history. So I think it's very important for us to understand that aspect as well as how the system really runs. And it may not be the easiest thing to do, so later inventors like Benitez are a simpler system with higher output. Therefore, you know, that may be the better way to start for somebody than to go back to Cook's patent. But I'm bringing your attention to this to bring clarification. So the iron core may be a solid bar or a bundle of iron wire. Of course, the latter giving higher tension, higher voltage to the current with equal length and fineness of wire. So of course you have a reduction of eddy currents and therefore less heating and actually higher efficiency in the system. Everybody knows that. It's nothing new. He uses number 16 gauge or heavier wire, and then in the use of the compound he's using number 30 or even less. So the secondary winding, so if we go back again, so we're looking at the secondary winding here, which is actually wrapped around the iron, and then the primary, I mean really they're both kind of primary and secondaries in themselves because they interact with each other back and forth between the two groups. So anyways, this would be the 30 or more gauge wire, and this would be the 16. And then, of course, we can look at here, the secondary offers but little resistance to the terminal secondary, quicker action secured, blah, blah, blah. So we don't really need to follow anything more except to say there is some speculation as to whether there is part of the diagram missing from the patent or another page missing, or whether he just expects you to understand what he's talking about. Because he says here, they do not manifest themselves in the main circuit D. There is no D on the diagram here at all. There's A, B, and C. And so usually when you refer to a something in a patent like that, you are going to show it, especially in when you say a main circuit D. So there's a question whether that has been lost, been removed, whatever is the case. It's still, you're still able to figure this out from his words. His words aren't tricky, they're pretty straightforward. And if you consider, like I said, the later patents from others who have done similar things, you will see his system is pretty basic, and it should work. And he claimed it did, so we're not looking at a liar here. So anyway, he's developing these currents back and forth between the two pairs. They're circulating continuously to the point where he says, by this means, a constant current is kept in the several helices. And then what he can do is he adds a rheostat, which he mentions here somewhere. Let's see if I can find it here. Let's see, where did you say that? He maintains, circulates the power, and then he gates out some of the power. Well, first of all, here's some more description of the coil. The coils may be composed of from 500 to 1,000 feet or more primary coil. So if we think of that number 16 or bigger gauge wire, 500, 1,000 feet around a core, you know, that's, I mean, the primary is going to be around the secondary, so the secondary is going to have some space to it, and wrapping 500 feet, you know, there's a good bit of wire. It's not just one turn, it's back and forth to do that much wire. Okay, and then he says, but one current in the same direction. That's important to notice. And he starts it up with a simple current around one of the helices, and some have drawn the coil like this, just hitting with the battery once, disconnecting it, and being done with it. And then what happens is it just keeps going from that end. Now, he does say here again, if the circuit is broken, the current instantly ceases. Obviously, there's no means of disconnecting it. So, the only way you can continue that with a disruptor circuit is to have the capacitor in series, like I said, with the make and break contact here. It's an improvement upon induction coils, so if you have the capacitor here, it will hold this without stopping it. The current will continue to rotate in the system. But what he's talking about is a fundamental break, a switch, a disconnection. It can only be restored by the same means it was first produced. To allow the use of the main circuit for common purposes, I introduce a rheostat, or resistance of any kind into the circuit, like this. This is a resistance right here into the circuit. We're already maintaining itself back and forth without the load, but we're adding a resistance, this transformer here, and the resistance in those bulbs, which those bulbs are isolated, and I'll get into that in a minute. So that a small portion of the current only will flow along the resistance, okay, a small portion, by which means the action in the helices is freely maintained when the main current is broken, and instantly restored when it is close to its full force. So there is a means here, and someone has drawn up this diagram. Well, actually not that one. This other diagram. Oh, I know where it is. It's right here. Oh, you can't see the picture. Can't show it for some reason. Anyway, he's talking about a rheostat in line with this part of the circuit. So we'll go back to this diagram right here. And putting a rheostat in line with it creates an opportunity right here that you can run a resistive load, and you can put a transformer like I'm doing here, or the rheostat is interesting because it's adjustable. So you have adjustable resistance to keep the whole thing going and to adjust the output that you want to take out of it. By this means, the action becomes in effect the same as the common battery currents. It may be used for similar purposes. So again, his improvement on induction coils to make a battery, non-chemical battery, a merely electro process. So then he also says that the alternate changes in the iron cores and the magnets may be used for producing electromagnetic motion. So he, in doing this, he has shown not only the inductive free energy systems with transformers, which encompasses a third or half of all the free energy systems that exist, with its spark gaps and so forth. And also he includes the whole magnetic motor systems like we have in my dual pole system, or what numerous other inventors have done over the last 100 years. He has shown that you can do this as well in one system. So the key elements in this is actually not shown in the diagram. Obviously the rheostat isn't shown, and yet it is clearly stated. Circuit D, he's not actually even showing the circuit running here. He's just telling you in descriptive words. These are not rheostats here. These are just the same as right here, where I have I put a wire through, like this little red wire, I'll show later on, a close-up of this, and you have just a clamp, a wire clamp, that's all that is right there. So this is not even showing where the other wires are connecting, because it's not, those who are skilled in the art is all the patent is written for, not for common Joe person, A, B, and C how to replicate. That's what you gotta understand about patents. So there is an interrupter here to make this possible, otherwise it would not be able to continue itself. So that is a make and break contact. This is an open loop system necessary to maintain this. And then the induction coil itself, with its primary and secondary, becomes a gain between the two. There's an interaction that's that produces a gain. How that actually happens is subject to various people's theories, and that's not important. So that is what I wanted to talk about there. And let's go on to the next point. Just briefly, let's look at these patents are doing the same sort of thing. More specifically, this patent is 2 induction coils. He says it very clearly. These terminals, this is an induction coil and this is a transformer. And so he's clearly stating that these terminals are connected, both primaries together, in this patent by Benitez. Benitez patent number 14311. And in which there's a gain here. Now he talks about running it in this way as well. If we go into this one, This is a simplified version of this. We'll get into that more specifically. And there still is a gain right here, but obviously that he included this secondary transformer with its spark gap and extra capacitor. There was an additional gain by adding this spark gap into the system. And so if you look at this, these are the only two connections. So this is both the input and the output. And this higher frequency, higher voltage will, all these windings will relate to each other and amplify each other, and a gain which will then send it upon the charging batteries in order to maintain a charge. So this is Cook's system with batteries and making it simple and running a excessive load here. It's not certain exactly how much of the load Cook could get off of his system. He doesn't state that, but Benitez actually gives you numbers in his last patent of what you could expect with giving you all the details. So what I'm getting at is Benitez system is directly, no doubt he read Cook's patent, or there were a common connection somehow. Sometimes people can reinvent things without knowing. I don't know, but let's look at another patent here that is clearly a something that follows. And I think I have a bigger, here's a bigger picture of it. This is Ed Gray, 1974. So exactly 100 years later, he is following the Benitez system as well, in which Benitez follows Cook. So we'll look at this in a minute. Others, such as Don Smith, is clearly a system right here that's doing the exact same thing as Benitez. There isn't really much difference, just newer parts. And then Gabriel Cron is another one earlier than Don Smith and earlier than Ed Gray, which also utilize some of these kinds of processes, not as clearly revealed what he did in his system, but he talks about doing the same things. And then Kapanadze in Georgia, Russia area, his system is also using a very similar type of induction coil type of system that he gets more gain, including the earth ground. This is something we need to look at a little bit later in the video. And so the ground part of the circuit is also assumed in many of these early systems. The ground was considered a source of free energy and great vast potential, especially with the upper atmosphere in the ground, and it's a sink. So a lot of these high disruptive discharge systems where you have a high frequency, high voltage system, when you connect up one terminal to a body of some sort of metallic body, you will see you can light a light bulb with one wire input. And with this particular system right here, when we connect in the ground, it changes everything. We can run loads many times their output. Without the ground, this particular system doesn't really produce anything. And so early on, 100 years ago, the ground was an essential part of many systems. Some of them didn't need to run off of it, but you often see that in circuit diagrams. it wasn't just a common ground, it was a ground, earth ground. And so you will pretty much always be able to enhance these systems by connecting to an earth ground at the right place and using the right arrangement of diodes and so forth. We can, and with the right resonance, if you tune your system that can be in harmony with the earth's vibration and frequency, then you will be able to benefit from that. So a lot of systems like this did that, and they kind of assumed that you knew that too. And so you got to pay attention to the circuit diagrams. My objective is not to just show one system here, it's more to go over a whole bunch of them. So let's look at the history of the induction coil.